Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked across the dry farmland. The sun was setting on Haven, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. At 22, Jake had spent his entire life on this small farming planet, watching the same sunsets and working the same fields his father had before him. Most young people on Haven dreamed of leaving for the big city planets or joining the space fleet. But Jake was different. He found peace in the quiet routine of farm life, even if the work was hard and the pay was terrible. His family's farm sat on the edge of the old meteor crater, a massive hole in the ground that had been there since before anyone could remember. Today felt different though. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He'd been checking the water lines that fed their crops when his old metal detector started going crazy near the crater's edge. The machine was ancient, passed down from his grandfather, but it had never acted like this before. The detector's needle was spinning wildly, and a high-pitched beeping sound filled the air. Jake knelt down and ran the device over the ground again. The beeping got louder. Whatever was down there was big, and it was deep. Jake looked around the empty fields. His parents were in town getting supplies, and his younger brother was at school. No one would miss him if he spent a few hours digging. Besides, maybe he'd find something valuable. The farm could use the money. He grabbed a shovel from the barn and started digging. The ground was harder than he expected, packed tight with clay and small rocks. After an hour, his hands were covered in blisters, but he kept going. The metal detector said whatever was down there was still 20 feet below. By the time the sun had completely set, Jake was standing in a hole that came up to his chest. His back ached, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. He was starting to think this was a waste of time when his shovel hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. It made a hollow, metallic sound. Jake's heart started beating faster. He cleared away the dirt with his hands, feeling around in the darkness. His fingers touched something smooth and cold. It felt like metal, but smoother than anything he'd ever felt before. The surface was perfectly flat, almost like glass. Working by the light of his phone's flashlight, Jake dug around the object until he could see its shape. It was a cylinder, about the size of a baseball bat, made of something that looked like black glass. Strange symbols covered its surface, symbols that seemed to move and shift when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. Jake had never seen anything like it. The symbols definitely weren't from any human language he knew. They looked ancient, carved with incredible precision into the smooth surface. As he stared at them, Jake could swear they were glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He tried to lift the cylinder out of the hole, but it was heavier than it looked. After several attempts, he managed to get it up to ground level. Under the starlight, the object looked even stranger. The symbols were definitely glowing now, casting soft shadows on the ground around them. Jake knew he should probably call someone. The colonial authority had rules about finding strange objects, especially ones that might be alien in origin. But curiosity got the better of him. He reached out and touched the cylinder with his bare hand. The moment his skin made contact with the surface, pain exploded through his skull. It felt like someone had plugged his brain into an electrical socket. Jake tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't move. His whole body was frozen. Images flashed through his mind faster than he could process them. Massive ships the size of cities moving between stars. Humans in strange armor wielding weapons that bent reality itself. Planets being born and dying in the blink of an eye. Technologies that seemed like magic, controlled by human hands. Through it all, a voice spoke directly into his thoughts. It wasn't speaking any language Jake recognized, but somehow he understood every word perfectly. Finally, the voice said, ancient and tired but filled with hope. The rightful heir has awakened. The bloodline continues. The legacy will not be lost. The pain stopped as suddenly as it had started. Jake collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The cylinder was still glowing, but now the light seemed warmer, more welcoming. Jake felt something deep inside his chest, like a door had been opened in his mind that he didn't even know existed. Looking up at the stars, Jake realized his quiet life on Haven was over. 3 days after finding the strange cylinder, Jake's world turned upside down. He woke up that morning feeling different, like his brain had been rewired overnight. The first sign something had changed came when he walked into the kitchen and heard his family's old radio playing what sounded like gibberish. But as Jake listened closer, the gibberish started making sense. The broadcast was in an alien language, probably from the trading post in orbit around Haven. Jake had never heard this language before in his life, yet somehow he understood every word. They were discussing crop prices and shipping schedules like it was the most normal thing in the world. His younger brother Tommy walked into the kitchen and froze when he saw Jake. "Dude, what's wrong with your eyes?" Tommy asked, backing away slowly. Jake rushed to the bathroom mirror and got the shock of his life. His normally brown eyes were glowing with a soft blue light, the same color as the symbols on the cylinder. The glow faded after a few seconds, but Jake could still feel something different behind his eyes, like a computer had been installed in his brain. Over the next few hours, stranger things kept happening. When Jake touched their broken tractor, he could suddenly see its internal systems in his mind. He knew exactly which wire was loose and which part needed replacing, even though he'd never been good with machinery before. The electromagnetic fields around their house became visible to him, showing up as colored lines of energy flowing through the walls and appliances. But the scariest moment came when he accidentally touched their computer and felt his consciousness slip inside it. For a terrifying few seconds, Jake was the computer. He could access every file, every program, every piece of data stored in its memory. When he jerked his hand away, the computer screen was displaying information he'd never seen before, technical readouts that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. Tommy had been watching everything with wide eyes. "Jake, I think you should see a doctor," he said quietly. "This isn't normal." Jake was about to agree when he heard the deep rumble of engines overhead. Both brothers ran outside and looked up to see 3 massive ships descending through Haven's atmosphere. These weren't the small cargo ships that usually visited their planet. These were military vessels, sleek and dangerous looking, with the symbol of the Galactic Authority painted on their hulls. The ships landed in the field next to their house, crushing several rows of crops under their landing gear. Jake felt his heart sink as armed soldiers in strange armor began pouring out of the ships. He'd heard stories about the Galactic Authority. They were the police force that kept order across human space, but everyone knew they answered to the alien races that really ran the galaxy. The soldiers started setting up equipment and scanning the area around the crater where Jake had found the cylinder. They were looking for something, and Jake had a terrible feeling he knew what it was. That night, as Jake lay in bed trying to make sense of everything that had happened, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was simple but sent chills down his spine. "Meet me at Miller's Pond at midnight. Come alone. Your life depends on it. A friend." Jake almost ignored the message, but something told him this was important. He snuck out of the house and walked the half-mile to the old pond where he used to fish as a kid. A figure stepped out from behind the trees, and Jake tensed, ready to run. "Relax," said a woman's voice. "My name is Captain Lisa Hayes. I'm with the Earth Colonial Defense Force." The woman was in her 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of confident posture that came from military training. She wore civilian clothes, but Jake could see the outline of weapons hidden under her jacket. "I know what happened to you 3 days ago," Captain Hayes continued. "You found one of them, didn't you? One of the relics." Jake's mouth went dry. "How do you know about that?" "Because there have been others," she explained. "Across human space, people have been finding these artifacts. Always the same story. Always people with a specific genetic marker in their DNA." She pulled out a tablet and showed Jake a map of human-controlled space. Red dots marked dozens of locations across multiple star systems. Each of these dots represents someone like you. Someone who found a relic and started changing. "Changing into what?" Jake asked. Captain Hayes looked grim. "Into what humanity was always meant to become. These artifacts were left by the first wave colonists, the humans who left Earth 3 centuries ago and vanished. They didn't die, Jake. They evolved. And now their descendants are waking up." Jake felt the cylinder calling to him from its hiding place back at the farm. "Why are the Authority ships here?" "Because the alien races that run the galaxy are terrified," Captain Hayes said. "They've spent centuries keeping humanity weak and divided. But if people like you fully awaken, if you access the technology and knowledge your ancestors left behind, everything changes." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They're not here to study the relics, Jake. They're here to destroy them. And anyone connected to them." Jake looked back toward his family's farm, where the Authority ships sat like sleeping predators in his fields. His quiet life was definitely over. Jake barely had time to pack a single bag before Captain Hayes was dragging him toward her ship. The Authority soldiers had started moving toward his family's farmhouse, their weapons ready. Jake's heart pounded as he thought about his parents and Tommy, but Hayes assured him they'd be safer if he wasn't there. "They want you, not your family," she said as they ran through the darkness. "As long as you're gone, they'll leave them alone." Hayes' ship, the Defiance *, was hidden in a grove of trees about a mile from Jake's house. It looked like a beat-up cargo hauler from the outside, but Jake could sense something different about it the moment he stepped aboard. The ship hummed with energy that felt almost alive. "Welcome to the rebellion," Hayes said as they strapped into the pilot seats. The engines roared to life, and they lifted off just as searchlights from the Authority ships began sweeping the area where they'd been hiding. The crew of the Defiance was small but dedicated. There was Hayes, obviously the leader. Beth Wilson, a former Authority pilot who'd gone rogue when she learned the truth about the alien conspiracy. And Kevin Park, a tech specialist who could make any computer do things its designers never intended. As they flew through hyperspace, Jake learned more about what was happening across human space. The Authority had been hunting down people like him for weeks, calling them genetic anomalies, and claiming they were dangerous to galactic peace. Some had been captured. Others had fought back. A few had simply disappeared. "The thing is," Kevin explained while working at his computer station, "these people aren't just random. Every single one has the same genetic markers. Traces of DNA that date back to the first wave colonists." Jake had heard stories about the first wave his whole life. 300 years ago, Earth had sent out massive colony ships to explore the far reaches of space. The ships had vanished without a trace, and most people assumed they'd been destroyed or had failed somehow. Earth's second wave of colonization had been much smaller and more careful. But Jake was starting to suspect the official story was wrong. The cylinder he'd found was still with him, wrapped in a cloth bag. Sometimes at night, he could hear it whispering in his mind, showing him images of star maps and coordinates. When he told Hayes about this, she got very excited. "It's guiding you," she said. "All the relics do that eventually. They're trying to lead their chosen ones somewhere specific." Following the relic's guidance, they jumped to a system that didn't appear on any official star charts. It was a dead place, with no planets and only a few asteroids orbiting a dying red star. But Jake's enhanced senses picked up something the ship's scanners had missed. "There," he said, pointing to what looked like empty space. "Something's there." Hayes fired the ship's probing lasers in that direction, and suddenly a massive shape appeared on their screens. It was a ship, but unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was at least 5 miles long, with a design that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. Strange materials covered its hull, and energy patterns flowed across its surface like living circuits. "My God," Hayes whispered. "It's a first-wave vessel." They docked with the ancient ship carefully. The airlock still worked perfectly, despite being 3 centuries old. As they explored the corridors, Jake was amazed by what they found. The technology was incredible, far beyond anything humans use today. The walls seemed to be made of a material that was part metal, part crystal, and part something else entirely. Kevin managed to access one of the ship's data terminals by connecting his portable computer to it. What he found there changed everything they thought they knew about human history. "The first wave didn't fail," Kevin said, his voice full of awe as he read through files that had been locked away for centuries. "They succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Look at this." The data showed star maps covering half the galaxy, marked with human settlements and outposts. There were records of incredible technologies, ships that could travel faster than light without using hyperspace, weapons that could move stars, and cities that existed in multiple dimensions at once. "They built an empire," Jake said, studying the records. "Humanity controlled half the galaxy." "Then what happened to them?" Beth asked. "Why did they disappear?" The answer to that question was buried deeper in the ship's memory banks. The first-wave humans hadn't disappeared or died out. They had evolved. Using technology they discovered in the far reaches of space, they had begun changing themselves, becoming something more than human. But their transformation had scared the other alien races in the galaxy. A war had started, one that the evolved humans could have easily won. But instead of fighting, they had chosen to withdraw from galactic politics entirely. They had hidden their colonies, erased their presence from official records, and left behind only the relics for their descendants to find when the time was right. The relics are keys, Jake realized, feeling the cylinder pulse in response to his thoughts. Keys to all of this hidden technology. As they continued exploring the ancient ship, Jake found that his abilities were growing stronger. He could now interface directly with the ship's systems, understanding technologies that should have been impossible to comprehend. When a damaged section of the ship needed repairs, Jake found he could fix it just by placing his hands on the broken components and willing them to work. But their discovery hadn't gone unnoticed. Authority ships had tracked them to the dead system, and now they were surrounded. Hayes fired up the Defiance's engines as enemy vessels closed in from all directions. "They really don't want us to learn the truth," she said grimly as laser fire began lighting up the space around them. Jake closed his eyes and reached out with his new abilities. He could feel the ancient ship systems responding to him, weapons and defenses that had been dormant for centuries beginning to wake up. The hunt was definitely on, but now Jake was starting to understand he might not be the prey after all. The real question was whether he was ready to become what his ancestors had always intended him to be. The relic in Jake's hands had been growing warmer for days, pulsing with an urgent rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. The ancient artifact was guiding them deeper into unexplored space, toward coordinates that existed on no known star map. Captain Hayes followed its directions without question, even though it meant jumping through systems controlled by hostile alien forces. "There," Jake said suddenly, pointing through the viewport at what looked like empty space around a collapsed star. "It's there." Kevin ran every scanner they had, but found nothing except radiation and cosmic dust. Yet Jake could see it clearly now, his enhanced vision cutting through the interference that hid it from normal sensors. A structure so massive it made the ancient ship they'd found look like a toy. "Trust me," Jake said, his eyes glowing brighter than they ever had before. "Take us in." As the Defiance moved closer to the dead star, reality seemed to shift around them. The empty space rippled like water, and suddenly they were staring at the most incredible sight any of them had ever seen. A space station the size of a small moon hung in orbit around the dying star, its surface covered in the same flowing energy patterns they'd seen on the first wave ship. "How is this possible?" Beth whispered. "Something that big should show up on every sensor in the galaxy." "It's hidden," Jake explained, though he wasn't sure how he knew this. "Wrapped in layers of technology that bend space around it. The first wave humans didn't just build things. They learned to hide entire worlds." Docking with the station felt like entering a living organism. The airlocks didn't just open, they seemed to recognize Jake and welcome him inside. The corridors were vast and beautiful, with walls that pulsed with soft light and floors that felt warm beneath their feet. This wasn't just a space station. It was something alive. Jake felt drawn to the station's center, where a massive chamber housed what looked like a giant crystal surrounded by flowing streams of energy. As he approached, the crystal began to glow brighter, and suddenly a voice filled his mind. But this wasn't like the relic's whispers. This was something far more powerful. "Welcome, child of the bloodline," the voice said. It wasn't speaking in words, but Jake understood it perfectly. "I have been waiting so long for one of you to return." The others couldn't hear the voice, but they could see Jake's reaction as he stepped closer to the crystal. His eyes were now glowing so brightly they lit up the entire chamber, and energy patterns similar to those on the station walls began appearing on his skin. "What are you?" Jake asked aloud. "I am the memory of your people," the voice replied. "The collective knowledge of the first wave, preserved here for the day when humanity would be ready to reclaim its destiny." Images flooded Jake's mind, but these were different from the brief flashes he'd experienced before. These were complete memories, entire lifetimes of knowledge downloaded directly into his consciousness. He saw the truth about humanity's first expansion into space. The first wave colonists hadn't just explored the galaxy. They had discovered something incredible in the vast emptiness between stars. Ancient technology left behind by a race that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. This technology didn't just advance human capabilities. It changed humans themselves, allowing them to interface directly with machines, to manipulate energy with their thoughts, and eventually to exist as both physical and digital beings. But the other alien races in the galaxy had watched this transformation with growing terror. Humans were already adaptable and creative in ways that made other species nervous. The idea of humans who could control technology with their minds, who could exist in multiple forms at once, was too frightening to accept. A secret alliance had formed between the major alien powers. They couldn't destroy the evolved humans directly, because the first wave had become too powerful. But they could isolate Earth's remaining colonies, suppress human development, and make sure no one else discovered the transformative technology. "They turned some of your own people against you," the station's AI continued, showing Jake images of humans in authority uniforms. "Promising them power and position if they helped keep humanity weak." Jake saw fleets of ships crewed by humans who believed they were serving galactic peace, but were actually enforcing humanity's imprisonment. At the head of these forces was Commander Rachel Stone, a human woman whose hatred of her own species ran so deep that she'd made it her life's mission to hunt down anyone with first-wave genetics. "The awakening has begun," the AI said as Jake felt his connection to the station growing stronger. "Your touch has activated systems that have been dormant for centuries. Even now, signals are spreading across the galaxy, reaching hidden bases and sleeper ships left behind by your ancestors." Jake could feel it happening. Like ripples spreading across a vast pond, energy pulses were racing from the station to distant stars. Somewhere out there, other humans like him were suddenly experiencing the same awakening he'd gone through. Ancient technologies were coming online, revealing themselves to people who carried the right genetic markers. But the awakening wasn't just activating human technology. It was changing the people themselves. Jake could feel his own transformation accelerating as he absorbed more knowledge from the station. His consciousness was expanding beyond his physical body, allowing him to perceive multiple dimensions of reality at once. He was becoming something new, something that existed at the intersection between biological life and pure information. This is what we were always meant to become, Jake realized as he felt his awareness spreading through the station's systems. He could access any computer, control any piece of technology, simply by thinking about it. But more than that, he was starting to understand the fundamental forces that held the universe together. The station's sensors showed him the approaching threat. Massive fleets were converging on their location from across the galaxy. The Authority had detected the awakening signals and mobilized every ship they could find. Commander Stone's forces were leading the charge, determined to destroy the station and everyone on it before the human transformation could spread any further. "They're coming," Jake told his companions, though his voice now carried harmonic frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. "All of them. They're going to try to stop this before it goes any further." Captain Hayes checked her weapons, but they all knew the Defiance couldn't stand against an entire fleet. "How long do we have?" Jake closed his eyes and felt his consciousness expand across light years of space, touching the approaching ships and reading their intentions. 6 hours. Maybe less. But Jake was no longer afraid. The station was showing him possibilities he'd never imagined. Humanity didn't have to fight this battle with conventional weapons. They had access to technologies that could reshape reality itself. The question wasn't whether they could win. The question was what humanity would choose to become when the fighting was over. As energy continued to flow between Jake and the ancient station, he realized he was becoming something that had never existed before. Part human, part machine, part something entirely new. And across the galaxy, others like him were beginning their own transformations. The war for humanity's future was about to begin. The battle for humanity's future began not with the roar of engines, but with silence. Jake stood in the heart of the ancient station, his consciousness now spread across multiple dimensions of space and time. Through his enhanced awareness, he could see the massive Authority fleet approaching Earth's solar system, their weapons charging for what they believed would be the final strike against human evolution. Commander Rachel Stone's flagship led the assault, her hatred for her own species burning brighter than the stars around her. She had convinced the alien races that humanity's transformation posed an existential threat to galactic civilization. In her mind, she was saving the universe from a plague that had to be stopped before it spread further. But Jake could see something she couldn't. Across human space, the awakening signals had reached their targets. People who had lived ordinary lives just days before were suddenly experiencing the same transformation Jake had undergone. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, and students were all discovering they could interface with technology, manipulate energy fields, and access knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. More importantly, the sleeper ships were waking up. These vessels had been drifting in the dark spaces between stars for 300 years, their crews in suspended animation, waiting for the signal that would call them home. As Jake's awakening pulse reached them, ancient engines that defied known physics began to hum with life. The first ship materialized near Jupiter without warning, phasing into normal space from a dimension that human science had barely begun to understand. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, its hull flowing like liquid metal while energy patterns danced across its surface. More ships followed, dozens at first, then hundreds, emerging from hiding places that spanned half the galaxy. Captain Hayes watched the display on the Defiance's asterisk sensors with amazement and fear. "Jake, what are those things?" Jake's voice now carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in multiple dimensions. "Our family," he said simply. "The descendants of the first wave. They've been waiting for us to call them home." The crew members of these ancient vessels were barely recognizable as human anymore. Centuries of evolution had changed them into beings of pure thought and energy, capable of existing as both matter and information. They had transcended the limitations of biological life while retaining the creativity and adaptability that made humanity unique. Commander Stone's fleet opened fire as soon as the first wave ships appeared, unleashing every weapon in their arsenal. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and gravity bombs filled space with deadly energy. For a moment, it looked like the ancient vessels might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Then Jake acted. Reaching out through the station systems, he connected with every piece of human technology in the solar system. Satellites, space stations, mining platforms, even the computers on Earth itself suddenly became extensions of his will. He didn't destroy Stone's weapons or disable her ships. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He showed everyone the truth. Every screen in the Authority fleet suddenly displayed the real history of humanity's expansion into space. The alliance between alien races to suppress human development. The deliberate sabotage of Earth's colonies. The lies that had been told for 3 centuries to keep humanity weak and divided. Many of the human crew members serving in the Authority fleet had never known this history. They had genuinely believed they were serving galactic peace. As the truth washed over them, ship after ship began powering down their weapons and refusing Stone's orders. But some remained loyal to the old ways, and the battle continued. Jake felt himself changing even further as he drew on the station's full power. His physical body was becoming less important as his consciousness expanded to encompass multiple realities at once. He was becoming something new, a bridge between humanity's past and its incredible future. The first wave ships moved through space like living things, their evolved crews fighting not with hatred but with the calm efficiency of beings who had transcended the need for violence. They didn't seek to destroy their enemies, but simply to render them harmless. As the battle raged, Jake made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of pressing the attack, he opened a communication channel to every ship in both fleets. "This ends now," Jake's voice echoed across space, carrying with it the weight of humanity's entire evolutionary journey. "We didn't choose this path to conquer anyone. We chose it to become who we were always meant to be." He showed them visions of what humanity's transformation could mean. Not just for humans, but for every species in the galaxy. The technology the first wave had discovered wasn't limited to human genetics. It could help any race evolve beyond their current limitations, to explore new dimensions of existence without losing what made them unique. "Join us," Jake offered, his words reaching into the minds of every being who could hear them. "Let go of your fear and discover what you could become." The response was immediate and dramatic. Several alien species, ones who had always been curious about humanity's potential, began powering down their weapons and requesting permission to approach the first wave ships. They wanted to learn, to grow, to evolve alongside humanity into something greater than any single species could achieve alone. But others, led by Stone's faction, rejected the offer entirely. They retreated to the outer edges of the solar system, declaring the entire region contaminated and placing it under permanent quarantine. "Let them go," Jake said as some of the first wave crews prepared to pursue the fleeing ships. "They'll change their minds when they see what we become." In the days that followed, Earth became the center of a new kind of civilization. Humans who had never dreamed of leaving their home planets suddenly found themselves able to travel between dimensions. The boundaries between organic life and artificial intelligence began to blur as people learned to exist in multiple forms at once. Jake himself had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Part human, part machine, part pure consciousness, he served as humanity's ambassador to the universe. The quiet farm boy who had once dreamed of nothing more than tending crops had become the herald of his species' transformation. Standing on the observation deck of the ancient station, now orbiting Earth as a symbol of humanity's new age, Jake looked out at the stars with senses that could perceive realities beyond physical space. Somewhere out there, other species were beginning their own journeys of evolution, inspired by humanity's example. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in centuries, humanity was free to explore its true potential among the stars.